Oh, no. No, I was. sorry, my bad. My bad.
Okay.
Sorry, my bad. Looks good. Get Gian to get some view of this, but otherwise looks really good. I think the audio level sounds decent. Kind of slow though.
Welcome all to the memorial for Peter. And he's doing it one more time. So I think this is just a wonderful, strong gathering. Welcome to the Internet Archive. I'm the founder and digital librarian, Brewster Kale. And I'd like to just give you an idea of where you are. So we bought this building because it matched our logo. We had this logo for 15 years and then this building came for sale. It's like, wow, that's our logo. We have to get this building. And it was a church. It was a Christian Science church built in 1923. So that's why you're sitting in pews. And the idea is to leverage this space as a library. But exactly what a library looked like, we didn't know. So we thought we'd move slowly. It's been adapting to us and we've been adapting to it. So just a few little things of where you are. If you crane your heads around and you see the green lights and the little blue flickering lights in the back corners, that's about 15 petabytes of the over 100 petabytes of the Internet Archive's primary copy serving the internet. So that is where we actually store, I guess, about 15% of all of the collections of the Internet Archive. I think is kind of cool that you get to see somebody's servers, right? Usually you don't. They're usually sort of these cavernous photos, you know, just sort of where Darth Vader lives. But I think that it's important to be able to see and celebrate our technology, because technology reflects us. It reflects the people that build it, the people that support it, and the like, and so it should be beautiful. And then the other thing that people tend to ask about are the little statues that are around the sides, and that is us, the Internet Archive staff. So we're not just machines. We're actually, well, we're little porcelain statues. If you work for the archive for 3 years, we make a little statue and add you to the collection. It's kind of like the terracotta soldiers from Xi'an, China. It's trying to celebrate the people that are working in the public sphere, that are sitting out the stock options that might come from some being bought out by Google or something like that. The people that are working in the civic sphere to build an internet that we want to share and enjoy. So anyway, so that's where you are, and I'm very glad that you've come. It's going to be a brief evening tonight for your pews, so it's okay. It won't hurt too much. And the little cushions that you're sitting on, we were trying to think of. So how do you make people want to sit in pews now? It's like, well, let's make cushions. What's the Internet Archive way of making cushions? We said, why don't we just ask our friends to send their swag t-shirts to us from the .com era. And then we'll just make them into little cushions. So that's what you're sitting on. So I'd like to now introduce Peter's dear friend and co-organizer of tonight, Brian Christian.
Welcome, everyone. We're here to honor the work and the legacy of Peter Eckersley. Peter was a person who managed to represent so many different things to so many of the people whose lives he touched. He was a housemate, a friend, a partner, a brother, an impossibly connected connector of others, a cortado connoisseur, an electro swing enthusiast, a poetry aficionado, a passionate cyclist. He was also someone whose ideas, whose work, whose career changed the history of the internet. and the story of our civilization's relationship to technology. Perhaps no small part of his impact still lies ahead of us. I can think of no better place to honor the arc of his career and the impact of his work than here at the Internet Archive, a literal church full of blinking servers, a sacred place consecrated not just to technology, but to the preservation of our collective memory. Before we begin, a few words of thanks. Thank you to the Internet Archive, first of all, for graciously hosting this event in their incredible space. And to the many Internet Archive staff members who tirelessly coordinated with us to make this event happen. Thank you to my fellow organizers, to the friends and family of Peter who have put in the creative vision, the energy, and the effort to bring this all together. So many people have given their time, their money, their input, and their energy. I particularly want to highlight the contributions of Jolene Elizabeth, Mia Vu, Lou Bouquet, Morgan Martinez, and Anastasia Hannon, as well as my co-lead organizers, Brittany Gallagher and Amanda Shockett, who have been in a roughly daily contact about this event for now many months. This has truly been a team effort and has only been possible because of everyone's distinct contributions. Lastly, I want to thank our speakers who have come in some cases many thousands of miles to be here and to share their stories. With that said, I want to turn over the floor to our speakers this evening, beginning with our first speaker, Toby Ord.
"26 years ago, I sat down in an underground room at Melbourne University, a hall of identical computers. Next to me was a stylish young man with this on his screen. I couldn't believe it. My screen was all gray with a single blue window with white text. How did you get it to look like that? I asked. Well, you just need to gvim.fvwm2rc, he replied. What? No problem, I'll just send you all my config files and set you up. And that was the beginning of a long friendship. I still love his color choices. So enduringly Peter, the decadence of the purple and gold on a green silk waistcoatish background. I eventually changed my own background to Waterhouse's Lady of Shalott and sampled colors from her candles and silks for the text and accents. And when we got our own websites, they each inherited these Unix color schemes, and our digital identities forked off from that meeting in our own directions, with traces still visible and ongoing. I was in my first year and Peter in his second. Over our undergraduate years, our friendship grew. Here is my first ever photo of Peter on the right there in 98. After a protest march, we'd pitched tents in the middle of the most sacred quad at Melbourne University, and we're in a student politics meeting by a campfire under the camellia trees at midnight. Here's a more typical shot in 2000 at my 21st. We shared a deep thirst for ideas and a taste for wonder. We would talk about science and technology, about ethics and the nature of reality, late into the night. Indeed, while he was chiefly a technologist, he's among the people who have thought the deepest about the long-term fate of a universe shaped by intelligence and directed by moral values, about the limits of what we could achieve over the aeons ahead. And he was a natural philosopher too, with original contributions on the paradoxes at the heart of population ethics. Over the years, we talked about the big picture questions facing humanity, about global poverty and existential risk, and the ideas that would become effective altruism. When I started Giving What We Can in 2009, many years later, he was one of the 23 founding members, making a lifelong pledge to donate 1/10 of his income to the most cost-effective charities that he could find. He wrote about that. He said, For me, taking a pledge to give is exciting. I've long been persuaded that it would be better to use a good portion of my income to support very effective aid projects, but it's hard to know what they are, and often easier to spend money on luxuries that in the end aren't particularly necessary for happiness. A pledge is a way to ensure that I do what I already wanted to, a way to meet a community of people who think the same way, and a way to work together on finding the most effective projects to contribute to. Indeed, he continues to guide my vision for effective altruism. Last week, I ended my keynote talk with a slide about the importance of good character for all of us dedicated to helping others as much as we can. And the picture that I painted in that slide of integrity and earnestness was a picture of Peter. We also shared an enduring love of beauty. I never found out exactly the form his ideal future might take, but it would be a place of freedom and wonder and friends and beauty everywhere. In 2003, I left Melbourne to go to the Dreaming Spires of Oxford and study philosophy. He stayed in Melbourne, transferring from a PhD in computer science to one in law, trying to understand how to refashion an economic system based on principles of physical goods to one fit for virtual goods, to songs and stories and ideas that once created can be copied freely. A few years later, he got his dream job offer from the Electronic Frontiers Foundation in faraway San Francisco. And little did he know, but it would become his home. He would find a subculture within it that was like a distillation, the one that he moved in Melbourne. And let me share his first thoughts on San Francisco, the email he sent. Hi guys, I've been in San Francisco a week and it's definitely time for an email and stories. I'm sitting on a sidewalk as I write this, on a little timber bench with a coffee and a gorgeous bamboo plant next to me, photo attached. There's a course shop next to me. As soon as I opened my laptop, I got roped into a conversation with a bunch of geeks. One of them was asking for advice about internet regulation in Japan. Another worked for Google and was asking me to let them keep their files on everybody. This city is completely packed with nerds. Random conversations with them seem to be a regular occurrence. Working at EFF is remarkable. The organization is a nerve center for more lawsuits than you could sensibly imagine. Many, but not all of these, are a little depressing, except when they sue purple dinosaurs. My first week has been very busy, but I don't yet have a sense of how normal this is. Aside from numerous administrative diversions, I've been busy writing a white paper on how to keep your web search history private, a surprisingly hard thing to do. The other 3 technical staff will be away next week. Go and Google Burning Man. So I'm going to find out if I can administer and support the EFF's computer infrastructure too. This bike culture here is definitely stronger than in Melbourne, especially where I work. There are bikes everywhere. There also seem to be way more clean. There's a strange subcultural species of people known as hipsters. Bicycle fashion is an important part of this. Often they're on fixies, but not always. See, for example, the attached photo of a vague-seeming girl cruising around on a $5,000 bicycle made of bamboo and carbon fiber. I haven't found a house yet. It is back to school season, and judging from what I saw at an open house this afternoon, I might not find one for a few weeks. Fortunately, I can continue to sleep in Seth's incredibly precarious spare loft. Getting out of bed in the morning involves hopping onto a freestanding stepladder that wakes you up. Anyway, I'm going to go out and explore the corsetry. I'm missing you all. I'll try to set up a website somewhere so that I'm not filling your inboxes with my excessive verbosity. Speaking of which, I haven't actually attached any photos, but you can see them all at this link, which let me know what's happening in Melbourne, Peter. Sadly, his attached pictures are lost to bit rot. Even the Internet Archive does not have them. Although it did have that desktop picture that I started with. But I was looking through my old photos and I found this. A photo of Peter I took 5 years later, which, given the bamboo and the corset shop, must be the exact spot he was sitting when he wrote his email. We kept up over the decades with trips back and forth between our new cities. Here he is in 2008. And here are the two of us after we'd cycled all the way up to Coit Tower. And here he is in 2011, looking out over his adopted home. It was only after his death that I got a glimmer of just how much he did for the internet over his 16 years in San Francisco, especially privacy and security. It was only then that I really reflected on how wildly important that the internet is, yet how there's no one whose responsibility it is to keep it going and to improve it. It's like we're at sea on a great old sailing ship, but there's no captain, no owner. Peter is one of a few people who didn't stand idly by, but stood up and took on this responsibility. We couldn't even take the ship into dock. So Peter and others at EFF and elsewhere took on the crazy yet essential task of repairing and rebuilding it at sea. Peter loved forming connections with people. It was only in the outpouring of emotion after his death that I realized how great a part of his life it was. It was a flood of love for him, so strong that for a shining moment, even Twitter was a place of beauty and wonder. And I saw how he had made such strong connections with so many people, a node in a network with thousands of strands radiating out from him. I think he measured his wealth in friends and was a friend millionaire. But that wasn't enough. He was too good a computer scientist to be happy with a network structured like that. It was too brittle, too vulnerable. So he set about making connections between all those other nodes, connecting people who didn't know that they needed each other. We're now a network with a missing node at its center, but we haven't fallen apart. Because of what he started, there are hundreds of cross-linking paths between us. And we're not done. Even with a missing node, one can bridge the gap. I've only been back here a week, and there are so many conversations with strangers where my spidey senses tingled, and I've stopped and I've asked, did you know Peter? And often they did. And just like that, a connection formed. So this grand overarching project of Peter's life is not done. But now it's up to us to make our own introductions to each other, to fill out this grand network, and to find those he would have found for us. And what better way could there be to honor him? Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here. Since I don't think there was an official presentation of the shrine back there, I just wanted to point out to anyone who hasn't visited, while you're here, you should take a look at the amazing collection and the beautiful set of memorabilia to honor Peter at the back of the hall. Please don't miss that. If you did a web search recently for Peter Eckersley Memorial Internet Archive, you might have been confused at first because so many of the top results were from a decade ago, when Peter and I both spoke at this stage from this podium to eulogize our friend Aaron Swartz. Now I'm back up here to eulogize my friend Peter Eckersley. I worked with Peter for his entire time at EFF, by which I mean that I interviewed him for the staff technologist job in 2006, and I continued to talk to him about work even after he left EFF in 2018. Peter applied for the staff technologist position while he was still in Melbourne, and I was in his phone interview, and I remember asking him some questions about copyright policy, and then a computer science question about list comprehensions. Now, Peter had actually been assistant teaching computer science courses while he was in Australia, and he really knocked that one out of the park, although I think I need a cricket metaphor, maybe more than a baseball metaphor. But he explained the practical applications of this construct in programming languages, and he also could explain its historical and conceptual origins in set theory. And I was just amazed by that. And I said to my EFF colleagues, this guy is my top candidate. You know, he knows about copyright policy, and he knows about the mathematical foundations of programming languages and like in one person. And, you know, he was also knowledgeable about philosophy and economics. And I said, this person has a really amazingly broad perspective on the kinds of things that we work on. There was some uncertainty about whether EFF could hire him because he was Australian, but it turned out that he qualified for a visa under the newly minted US-Australia Free Trade Agreement. So they could. My apartment in the Mission, as was just mentioned, was actually his first stop. I think he stayed for a couple of days with our Australian colleague, Gwen, who must have helped ease his culture shock a little bit. And then he came and stayed in my loft bed, which was just mentioned, which is still there. It hasn't collapsed. So that's good. And, you know, it was very apparent, as we just heard from Toby, that he immediately was very taken with the community in San Francisco and all the people he was meeting and the connections he was forming and the conversations he was having. A recurring experience for a lot of us was asking Peter if he was interested in something and finding out that he was already a real connoisseur or an expert of that thing. I actually remember when he accepted the job offer, I said to him, Peter, do you like riding bicycles? And I thought that I was going to be able to show him some of my favorite bike rides in the Bay Area. But actually, in a very, very short time, Peter was showing me some of his favorite bike rides in the Bay Area and explaining to me about what's special physically about high-end road bikes and how to take a corner at high speed when you're descending, and helping me explore parts of the Bay Area for the first time on more ambitious rides than I would have undertaken myself. When I interviewed Peter to be staff technologist, that position, which I was the first person to hold, was mainly thought of as supporting the EFF lawyers in impact litigation. Peter was one of several people, I would also mention our colleague Chris Palmer, who advanced this, who really pushed for what's now called the Tech Projects Department at EFF to be able to do its own research, to have its own research agenda, to have its own project and engineering agenda, which I think was a really good move for the organization as a whole. And I think Peter was really instrumental in cementing that kind of transition and saying, yeah, we're going to do tech projects. Peter and I worked together for many years in the same office in the Mission District. We originally had the same title of staff technologist, but later on he became my boss. And I remember that he was somewhat reluctant to be promoted to tech projects manager. I've always thought that Peter was never particularly eager to be a manager, and he would much prefer, I think, to have been, as he later was, chief computer scientist. Peter was a constant fountain of ideas and energy, and as I told the Wall Street Journal, even those of his ideas that didn't necessarily work out were really creative and clever and original. Peter and I, for example, once caught Comcast lying about interfering with peer-to-peer file sharing, which is kind of a long story, and we got the company in a little bit of trouble. And then we wrote some complicated directions that a human being could follow to try to test whether this was happening. And I wrote some complicated software for human beings to try to use to see if ISPs were interfering with your communications. And the idea was to record the communications at both ends and then later compare the recordings and see if they were the same or different, so that you could try to see if the internet service provider was changing or blocking things. Peter noticed that it was going to be extremely tedious to get human beings to actually do this in pairs, and it wouldn't really be adequate to the scale of the problem. As Metcalfe's law says, you get possible connections proportional to n squared in a network of n users, which gets really unwieldy when you're squaring billions of users or devices. That comes to quintillions of possible connections to check. Peter was always fascinated with scale and growth rates and growth curves and extrapolating growth and trying to think of how to contend with the trajectories of growth and change. In fact, if he were here, he would probably say it's not necessarily n squared. Odlyzko says it may be n log n. Either way, it's a vast pool of pairs of computers that you have to check to see if the internet service providers are faithfully delivering the data or if they're tampering with it somehow. So Peter said, we have to get machines to do this. And he went off and wrote a tool called Switzerland, where your computer would do all of this testing for you. The computers would be the matchmakers to collect the recordings from different places on the internet and bring them together and see if what Alice sends to Bob matches what Bob then receives or not. Hopefully you got the joke about Switzerland being the software for testing net neutrality. But it turned out to be an incredibly thorny problem. And even though Peter's software basically worked, it would get false positives because there are reasons for the communications to be different that are arguably legitimate, or at least not the ISP's fault. So Peter could get these reports that communications by Alice are not 100% identical to those received by Bob, and maybe Comcast or someone is doing something sketchy, and then Peter could analyze them minutely and say, oh no, it's actually Alice's own network software that isn't allowing me to see the exact bytes that she sent. Oh no, it's actually Alice's router, it's not the internet service provider. Oh no, it's Bob's firewall, and so on. Many other cases that I'm happy to talk about on some occasion. So unfortunately, the rare case, at least in the United States, of your ISP blocking things or changing things was drowned out by the phenomenon that networking is just crazily complicated. Although this was one of the first tools that was developed to automate network neutrality testing, and there certainly are people at Google and others continued to develop tools like that, and I think to actually use them. When I was talking to others of Peter's former colleagues, some of whom you'll hear from in just a few minutes, we remembered a number of projects of his that were really ambitious, that reflected really good thinking about scale, and sometimes that ran aground on some kind of practical problem. Including the idea of making Wi-Fi software to restore the norm of having public open Wi-Fi everywhere. And Peter thinking, I'm going to redesign how browsers decide how to accept certificates. So to be clear, that one is not Let's Encrypt, which you'll also hear about in a few minutes. That one is actually two other earlier projects called Trustiness and Sovereign Keys. So Let's Encrypt in a way was Peter's third attempt to reshape that infrastructure and that ecosystem. And I guess the third time's the charm. We remembered that Peter was really eager to debate and discuss his ideas with people, and he was really eager to hear criticisms and to hear concerns. And I think Cindy is going to address that. But when people said, you know, Peter, that's not going to work, he didn't get offended. He said, wow, tell me why. Let's talk. And you know, sometimes Peter focused on exploring and documenting things even when he didn't have solutions for them. So I think of Panopticlick as an example of that, which was a research project that he did on web privacy. Basically, the web had become so full-featured that web servers could ask your browser lots of information about itself. And the browser would be happy to tell the website, oh, sure, here's the answer to your question about this browser. Arvind Narayanan really helped us to understand that people or things typically look very, very different from each other once you have enough data points, even if the individual data points don't appear very sensitive or revealing. When you have enough of them, they still are sufficient to draw distinctions and to recognize, oh, that's that person, oh, that's that person. And Peter understood that very well, and he was very concerned about that in terms of the web privacy. And he built a tool that shows that indeed, to a website that's asking these questions about the browser, each visitor's computer generally looks very, very different from every other visitor's computer, which is just terrible news for privacy. And it means that a lot of what we try to do to prevent tracking of users just won't work, at least not without legal or policy enforcement, or other kinds of trade-offs like making devices and software more of a monoculture and less customizable, which is really bad news. And Peter, unfortunately, was the bearer of that news, but impressively, he managed to bring us that news quantitatively. He managed to publish a paper and describe exactly how bad privacy on the web platform is numerically. Some of his work proved points like that. Some of his work addressed scaling up to address really big problems. And a lot, as I think every speaker is probably going to say, was about introducing people to each other, planting ideas in people's heads, making connections. And a lot of that, I think, is never going to be documented anywhere. I think, for example, Peter had a really significant effect on the adoption of HTTPS even before he founded Let's Encrypt, both by creating HTTPS everywhere and because he was constantly talking to security people at tech companies, having lunch with them, going for drinks with them, constantly asking them what they were going to do about particular problems and trying to talk those problems through with them. Peter's idea was that you had to always have lunch with every company's information security team periodically, not just because the cafeterias in Silicon Valley are so nice, but because you have to be prepared to make unexpected and important connections and to tell them who else is working on something or what they've neglected. I once pointed out to Peter that when you did a Google search and Google was afraid you were a robot, and they sent you a CAPTCHA challenge to see if you were a robot, Google's CAPTCHA page actually loaded over an unencrypted connection and included your search terms, even though you had done the original search over a secure connection. So my recollection is that I mentioned this problem to Peter, and he quickly talked to just the right person about this and said, pretty please, would you fix this? And got it fixed really quickly. And I think that there were all kinds of incidents like that, where Peter became aware of a problem in something that a company was doing in some part of the infrastructure, and he just knew the person who could address that. And he just got those things fixed, and there's not necessarily going to be a record that actually Peter was behind all of those fixes. It was always really impressive to see the range of people he knew and the range of conversations that he had with them. I felt like he was always popping over to Oxford to argue with philosophers about population ethics, down to Google to argue about security properties of pre-released products, off to Sweden to meet the founders of the pirate movement, over to Berkeley for an AI ethics seminar, off to another country to negotiate contracts with companies to get Let's Encrypt started, or of course during COVID, helping consult on contact tracing. The memorial immediately after Peter's death focused a lot on Peter as a friend and as a lover of life, and this memorial is more focused on his work and intellectual legacy. I have a lot to say about Peter as a friend, which I may have to say on another occasion, but I think there's so much crossover between these two things because Peter was such a social intellectual. A lot of his strength was in being prepared to talk about so many different ideas with people and in seeking out so many different people to talk about them with. You could also compare him to a bee who buzzes around and pollinates lots of different gardens. And as I said, someone who is fascinated with growth curves and trying to project things forward and trying to see where there might be an opportunity to affect things that had a very steep growth curve so that you would have a really big impact further in the future. I'm so sorry that Peter himself fell off of those growth curves, not least because he was having such a really lovely time with life. When he and I were up here talking about Aaron Swartz a decade ago, we pointed out, I think, that Aaron wanted to challenge us and thought we could all do better in the world with more quantification and more rigor. Like Peter, Aaron was very interested in effective altruism. I would say Peter's distinctive questions for us are something like, whom can you bring together? How can you raise the metaphorical temperature, as the AI people say, so that more ideas and more surprising and unexpected ideas are bouncing around? And of course, whom can you love? Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Cindy Cohen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I'm the one who sued the purple dinosaur. Preparing to talk about Peter tonight was actually a lot harder than I expected. And I think it's because it's still so wrong that he's gone. And on a certain level, I can't believe I will never hear that crazy Melbourne voice popping into my office again with a sparkle in his eye and telling me something absolutely crazy that he wanted to do. This was not a rare occurrence in my life. And even after he left EFF, I would see him occasionally and I'd get that same sparkle from him. And he'd say, oh, we got to have lunch. I got to tell you what I'm up to. And what I want to talk a bit now, because we focus a lot on the tech projects that Peter did, and they are huge and tremendous and really important. But as Seth pointed out, Peter wasn't hired to build technology at EFF. He was hired to explain technology to people like me. And he did it a lot. And some of these things are going to be very, very, they're just not going to have the important. And, you know, the number of things that Peter has explained to me over the years, and then that we use to protect everybody's privacy, to protect people's free speech, to make sure there was space for innovation, and that we tried to stop building crystal prisons with our technology and instead built some stuff that other people could build off of, is really more than I can count. So my role here today, hopefully, will be to talk a little bit about what it was like to work with Peter across disciplines and to try to be ultimately, for a while, I was his boss, as if, right? I think I've probably said no to Peter professionally more than anybody else on the planet. And I learned a few things over the years talking to Peter. First of all, he doesn't really believe in no. He believes that when he hears no, it's just somebody helping you figure out where you have messed up. As Seth said, when we got together, a few of us, to talk about Peter and plan for this night, we really remarked about how no matter what you told Peter about how bad his idea was, he was delighted to hear that. And he would go away, or sometimes in the moment he'd have his clever response, but sometimes he'd go away and then he'd show up again and poke his head into my office and say, well, I thought about what you've said. What if we did this? Or what if we did it this way? And I think, honestly, the reason that Peter never received no without a smile was because he never actually believed that no was an answer. And, his patience was endless when he had a goal in mind. And to be honest, sometimes that involves some scheming on his part, and sometimes maybe stretching the truth a little bit, at least in explaining to you how things were going to go. He listened to me about how things were going to go in court, but how things were going to go in the world, occasionally, maybe not exactly the way things were. But even when he was caught out, he'd just keep iterating until he could find a way to help get his idea across. And not all of his ideas were successful. But as Seth pointed out, he would just keep hacking at a problem until he found a different approach and a different approach until he finally found one that would work. Relentless with a smile. I'm not sure what to call this Eckersley approach. I was trying to find a clever name, but I've never experienced it with anyone else, and I miss it. I miss it already. Peter was also a never-ending fountain of ideas. He just had idea after idea. Every conversation he would come up with something, even if he was coming in with something he was trying to sell you on, he'd have 5 more ideas during the conversation. And one of, I think, Peter's best ideas was finding talent. Peter was able to spot so many people who came either to EFF, through EFF, or elsewhere, who were doing really amazing things. He would draw those people in. He would help them get where they needed to go. And so he was not just a font of his own ideas, he was a font of other people's ideas too, and other people's talents. And I think in some ways that is the best legacy that anyone can have, is all the other people that they inspired and spotted. He was a hacker in his heart. He had a very special hacking talent that was important at a place like EFF. We're pretty small compared to the issues we take on and the organizations we take on. And Peter's genius in some ways was finding the tiny little hack that would open up a big story. The demonstration tool, Switzerland is one of them, that would really help make manifest what people needed to see and understand about how technology was working. HTTPS everywhere, was a tiny hack that ended up creating the situation in which HTTPS is now everywhere. We've actually retired that project at EFF. Privacy Badger, which is a third-party cookie blocker that EFF makes. And honestly, the meeting in which we named it Privacy Badger is still one of the times that I think we were all crying. We were laughing so hard by the end of that meeting because Privacy Badger don't care about your business model. I don't think that was Peter's idea, but he was supportive. But the idea for Privacy Badger was to try to take a different idea and make it manifest, the do not track idea. We talked about open wireless, Seth talked about open wireless, and then ultimately, of course, Let's Encrypt, which ended up being, I think, one of the biggest and most important things that's happened in the last few years in terms of computer security and internet security. Others are going to talk more about that. I know Alex is here tonight. Peter also did hacking in other directions at EFF as well. We had a time where we had a personal trainer come to EFF and we'd all go to Dolores Park and we'd do these little workouts. And Peter, who was of course in amazing shape, he rode his bicycle every year, was always trying to find ways to not do the full exercise. He'd count wrong. He'd like try to do triple jumping jacks and say, he only had to do a third as many. That poor trainer, she was a lovely lady, but boy, my God. And he also hacked, we had a thing at EFF for a while called Healthy EFF. We have it actually again, where if you do a certain amount of exercise every day, we'll actually just give you money. We decided to do that rather than get people gym memberships or things like that to try to encourage people to take care of their bodies as well as their minds. In large part because of Peter, because we wanted people to get credit for whatever exercise they decided to do rather than trying to drive people to a particular kind of exercise. But you had to email every day and say, I did 30 minutes of exercise every day in order to get the money. And Peter was so frustrated because he couldn't automate that. We wouldn't let him. We made him send an email every day. I think he secretly wrote a program to send the email every day. But he just couldn't take it that he had to do something that was so inefficient. He was also around in a pretty famous digital rights Jeopardy game that we played one time, where everybody on the tech team was hacking it from the right and the left, and the thing kind of blew up. I don't think Peter was central to that, but he certainly was around and involved. So, and then, there was the time that Peter secretly built a gazebo on top of the EFF building and then left for 3 months. The neighbors complained, nobody would own up to it. And I think a few people had to go take it down in his absence. He thought we needed a gazebo. So there you go. There are so many good Peter stories, and he was really, as you all know, a one of a kind person. EFF really wouldn't be the organization it is today without him. Not only because he took being a staff technologist from being, into building technologies, but just in our approach to thinking about technology still is infused with a lot of Peter's insights and thoughtfulness. The one thing about Peter and his ideas that was unshakable and consistent, and even when I wanted to wring his neck, which I did on several occasions, was never in doubt. And that was that Peter's ideas were always about making the world a better place, a safer place, a more fair place, a more just place, and a better place for everyone in it. This is a cliche in Silicon Valley now. The Silicon Valley TV show is all about making fun of that. There are many people who have made fortunes pretending that that's what they did. But you know what? All of them, they're all just trying to be Peter because he was the real deal. And we will miss him and we will think of him always. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Micah Lee. I'm the Director of Information Security at The Intercept. Hello, that's much better. I'm Micah Lee. I'm the Director of Information Security at The Intercept. I worked at EFF with Peter for several years. And so one of Peter's major goals was to encrypt the whole web. And so he started, one of his earlier projects was a Firefox extension called HTTPS Everywhere. At the time, in 2010, a lot of websites like Google and Facebook supported HTTPS, but didn't use it very much. So anyone on your Wi-Fi could spy on exactly what you were searching for or easily take over your Facebook account. HTTPS everywhere simply forced all of the web requests you sent to these sites to use HTTPS instead of HTTP. In 2012, Peter made a version of it for Chrome too, and this was around the time that I took over maintaining the project. So I was really excited to make my first version of HTTPS everywhere for Chrome, to make the first release of it, all on my own. And at the time, I wasn't very experienced with releasing software, so I decided to do it at the end of the day on a Friday. And I made the release. I took BART across the bay to my house in Berkeley. And when I got home about an hour later, I quickly realized that I had bricked about 100,000 Chrome users' browsers. When they opened Chrome and tried loading any website at all, nothing would load. It would just be a white window with a message saying waiting for HTTPS everywhere in the status bar. So Peter, who was my manager, was extremely cool about it. Even though it took a few more hours to roll back the release and fix the problem because I had to take BART back into San Francisco to use the air gap signing key at the EFF office. Peter, who was always energetic and excited about a zillion different projects at the same time, didn't think that things like this were a big deal. He was extremely hands-off manager, which worked really well for me, but not necessarily for everyone. Peter launched many different projects while I worked with him. Some of them were extremely successful, like Let's Encrypt, and some of them never really went anywhere. I was around for the SSL Observatory, a research project that attempted to scan the whole internet, collecting all of the SSL certificates that we could find. And I remember when Peter showed me how it all worked, he had a folder with a few simple Python scripts, and they would just scan the entire internet's IPv4 range, connect to port 443, save the certificates that it found into a database. And I was really in awe at realizing how simple it would be for anybody to do like an internet-wide research project like that. I worked with Peter on the SSL Observatory also to add support to it to HTTPS everywhere, so people could submit certificates they saw in the wild to the observatory. Another project, which Cindy talked about and Seth talked about a little, is the Open Wireless project. He launched the Open Wireless project with the goal of making free open Wi-Fi hotspots available everywhere for everyone without any annoying captive portals that force you to give up your email address or phone number or agree to terms that nobody reads before letting you use the internet. The idea was that EFF would make custom router firmware, and then people could flash that firmware onto their routers, and it would handle making all of the choices for you. Then, you know, if enough people did this, there would just be open wireless networks everywhere. And his plans for this were big, because I remember excitedly talking to him about all of the possible things that people could build on top of this. People could have smartphones without having to pay for service. They would just be internet everywhere, and they could just use that. You could make cool things with Raspberry Pis that worked anywhere. There were all sorts of cool tech projects that you could do for street protests that would just work and have a connectivity. Sadly, this is one of the projects that never ended up going anywhere, but it was a great example of one of the ambitious projects that Peter was constantly spearheading. And this is something that I've absolutely picked up from Peter. With Peter's support and encouragement, I launched a bunch of my own projects while I was at EFF. I made software called CryptoLog that anonymized IP addresses and web server logs in such a way that it was still possible to tell the difference between page views and unique hits. I made an encrypted email bot called CryptoBot, where you write it an email and then it would incrementally respond and teach you how to start encrypting your email with PGP. And I kept Peter's habit of constantly launching projects into the world long after I left EFF. I made anonymous file sharing software called OnionShare. It's now one of the biggest projects in the Tor ecosystem. I made software called Danger Zone that you can use to convert sketchy Office documents into PDFs that you know won't hack your computer when you try opening them. I made a program called Semi-Ephemeral to help people delete their tweets and likes and DMs, and I kept maintaining it up until Elon Musk banned me from Twitter for doing journalism. So I got into this habit of writing a lot of code, most of it completely in the open, and publishing it to the world thanks to Peter. And Peter helped me realize how you can change the world with just a laptop and Git commits.
Hey everyone, my name is Jan, and like Micah, I was a staff technologist at EFF working under Peter. So because I don't actually have any slides, I just want to share a project we built very much in the spirit of Peter, because it was done in like the last 12 hours with 0 tests, open source. Probably will just break at some point, but Peter liked haikus. And so this is a little page that will just generate you AI generated haiku with a little picture of Peter. So feel free to play with that while I'm talking if you want, or there is a laptop with it on in the back in the shrine. So I'd like to start with a story from 2014. This was one of those crazy trips that Peter was taking to talk to tech companies all over the Bay, like Seth mentioned. This time we were going to Mozilla, and we were on our way back on the Caltrain when some guy sat down next to us and just asked us what we did. And I said, well, we work at the EFF. And he got really excited and he said, oh, wait, but what do you do? You already won. So I asked him what he meant by that. And he said, well, you defeated SOPA and PIPA a couple years ago. And that's it, right? You've won. You defeated the bad, evil legislation. And Peter laughed and he said, well, it doesn't work like that, because imagine this. You are a hero in a comic book, and every time you defeat your nemesis, a new one appears. It has to happen over and over again because you live in a comic book. The story has a lot of Peter-like elements to it. He has a flair for the dramatic, his talent with coming up with the perfect metaphor on a whim, his ability to just engage with strangers somehow. But above all, it exemplifies a really important truth that everyone here secretly knows, which is that Peter was a wizard. Why do we know that? Because he dressed like a wizard every day at work. He actually let me stay in his house once. It's a long story, but I was going through some stuff and he's like, you can just stay in my house. I'll go live at LinkedIn Labs. And his whole closet was just wizard clothes, like the socks, the blazers, wizard shoes, wizard pants, etc. And also he was a wizard because no matter how difficult a problem you gave him, he would come up with a solution that was really brilliant, creative, ambitious. And the result was often pretty much indistinguishable from magic. So one example, like Michael mentioned, in 2010, he came up with this browser extension called HTTPS Everywhere because Facebook did not automatically take you to the HTTPS version. And this grew and grew, like it went from just Facebook to like a 13 megabyte regular expression of sites that were known to support HTTPS. And this was a huge pain because most sites didn't support it because it costs money to get a TLS certificate. So Peter had this impossible vision. What if we could just give out free certificates that could be auto-renewed? And he thought that would change everything. And people would everyone would just get a certificate and the whole web would be encrypted. So he turned out to be correct because the project that became Let's Encrypt has now issued certs to 300 million websites. I'm sure Alex, who's next, will talk about it. But anyway, his plan worked out so well that HTTPS Everywhere is now deprecated as of last month because websites can just usually default to HTTPS. Amazing. So yeah, there's a lot of stories like this, but he was also a wizard because he could just show up at a time when you least expect him to and help you out in really unexpected ways. And he did this for me on a really personal level because in 2013, when Aaron Swartz passed away, I was looking at my life. Like I just started a physics PhD program and I thought like, wow, you know what Aaron did was really important. He was really trying to change people's lives for the better on this crazy thing called the internet that's largely unprotected and is just kind of taken over by these large companies. So I decided to drop out of my physics PhD and inspired by Aaron, I showed up at the EFF and I asked Peter, hey, like, I don't know anything about what you do, but can I have a job? He was pretty skeptical, but somehow he ultimately accepted my proposal. And I learned so much from him that he was forced to hire me as a staff technologist later that year. But all the things I learned from him over the years, such as how to write a Firefox extension, how to give a talk without any preparation, how to encrypt the web by default in only 13 years, etc. Most important was just how to be a visionary. Not really the straightforward kind who just tells you what you need to do, but like this really cryptic kind who gives you this barely comprehensible story with a lot of metaphors and then just kind of just pushes you to do whatever needs to be done to get there. That's not to say he never failed spectacularly, but I think if you were here, he would say if you're not failing spectacularly, you're not aiming high enough.
I'm sorry, those pews are pretty hard. Thank you. I'm Alex Halderman, professor at the University of Michigan. Believe it or not, barely a decade ago, it was normal to browse the web without any encryption. Probably the page that accepted your credit card used HTTPS, and if you were lucky, so did the form where you entered your password. But encryption was only used by about 1 in 4 web requests. Facebook, for instance, only began using HTTPS by default in 2013. That all may seem almost unbelievable today, because we know that governments, ISPs, and marketers can spy on our unencrypted traffic, that they censor messages they disfavor, and that they can even change the data we receive to weaponize our computers to attack others. We know that the network is evil and wants to kill us. But HTTPS is the web's most important defense against that. Fortunately, today, 90% of web requests use HTTPS, and we have Peter Eckersley as much as anyone else to thank for that. When you type a site like archive.org into your browser, how does your computer know it's talking to the real site instead of an imposter? The answer is that archive.org sends what's called a certificate, a statement vouching for the identity of the site that's digitally signed by an organization the browser trusts, called a certificate authority, or a CA. Every site that wants to use HTTPS first needs to find a CA and obtain a certificate. Back in the bad old days, before Let's Encrypt, getting a certificate involved, well, setting up an account with the CA, paying an annual fee, jumping through hoops to prove your identity, waiting for the certificate to be issued, and then manually reconfiguring your web server to install it. The process could take hours or days, and it was highly prone to human error. It's no wonder that HTTPS adoption was so low. Nobody even knew how many websites used HTTPS until an earlier project of Peter's. In the SSL Observatory project that he conducted in 2010 with Jesse Burns, they scanned the entire IPv4 address space, all 4 billion IP addresses, and collected the certificate from every public server. It's hard to convey today just what an audacious idea this was. It was only the second time or third time since 1982 that researchers had comprehensively scanned the internet. With tools available at the time, it took them months and heroic effort to do so. The SSL Observatory, in my view, is probably Peter's most unappreciated scientific accomplishment. It helped kick off an entire field of using internet-wide scanning for security research, and there have been thousands of subsequent scientific papers that apply that methodology. It was during subsequent internet-wide scanning research that Peter and I first became friends. And I witnessed almost immediately his seemingly limitless energy and enthusiasm for making the web a better place. I'd been incubating an idea quietly to myself that I just had to share with Peter. And the opportunity for that arose 11 years ago this week on March 1st, 2012, when Peter and I met at the RSA conference right here in San Francisco. As we wandered the halls of the Moscone Center, Peter practically completed my sentences. Despite its cryptographic faults, we said, the biggest vulnerability facing HTTPS was that not enough sites used it. The solution was to replace the complicated and labor-intensive process of getting a certificate with highly automated software and services based on open protocols managed by a not-for-profit. Automation would allow certificate authorities to offer basic certificates for free. We could drive the cost and complexity of deploying HTTPS to zero and make the entire web encrypted by default. All we had to do was build the technology and get CAs to adopt it. Well, by the next morning, Peter had dozens of ideas to move the project forward. He even had a name, Project Chocolate, he called it, since chocolate stimulates the brain to release oxytocin, a hormone that promotes the formation of trust. Peter, as always, was a whirlwind of activity. He quickly got EFF's blessing for Project Chocolate and brought in Seth Schoen, Jacob Hoffman-Andrews, and later Brad Warren and others. Together with my students, especially James Kasten, who went on to build another CA at Google, we spent the next year building prototypes and pitching the idea to CAs, though without any success. The most decisive step on the road to Let's Encrypt happened the next year in 2013, when one of Peter's many contacts tipped him off about a small parallel effort taking place at Mozilla. Peter and I connected with Josh Assa, Eric Rescorla, and later Richard Barnes, who had similar ideas about automating HTTPS, but with a twist. Instead of partnering with existing CAs, we could jumpstart adoption by founding a new certificate authority ourselves, an even more audacious idea. Our thinking was so complementary that within days of discovering each other, we merged our efforts, and the founding team for Let's Encrypt was in place. That summer, Edward Snowden came forward with chilling revelations about NSA mass surveillance, and the need for ubiquitous encryption became clearer than ever. Yet we still had a lot of work to do. It's not easy to become a CA, and it would take 2 more years and contributions from many people to make Let's Encrypt a reality. To operate the CA, we set up a nonprofit, ISRG, where Peter remained a board member and our moral conscience until shortly before his passing. We recruited our first sponsors, formalized the ACME protocol for certificate validation, developed production software, and found a CA willing to delegate trust to our certificates so that they would be accepted by browsers from day one. The entire team met in person, only once during this frenzied time, at a working retreat Peter organized. By that point in 2014, our group was large enough that Peter rented an entire mansion in the South Bay on Airbnb to house us all. There was just one catch, as Peter explained to me on the phone. So how do you feel about murder houses? Our intended lodgings, it turned out, had recently been the scene of a notorious home invasion and homicide, but so goes housing in the Bay. That lent an eerie backdrop to our discussions of certificate chains and protocol syntax as we grimly contemplated every gouge in the furniture and carpet stain. As roles in the project became more specialized, Peter led development of the initial ACME client, which would eventually become CertBot. In a reflection of Peter's vision for a web that's secure by default, CertBot aims not only to obtain a certificate, but to fully automate HTTPS deployment by reconfiguring existing servers. Today, CertBot is among the most popular Let's Encrypt clients, and it's maintained and developed by Peter's former team at EFF. After more than 3 years of work, Let's Encrypt issued its first browser trusted certificate in September 2015. From the beginning, we've used certificate transparency, a blockchain-like public ledger that allows the world to inspect every certificate Let's Encrypt has ever issued. So you can go back even today and look at the first few certificates, 3 the first days, 1 the next, and you'll find among them sites that Peter personally operated. Imagine what he was feeling as he tested his brainchild for the first time and saw the lock icon appear in his browser. 6 months after Let's Encrypt launched, we had issued 1 million certificates. After 9 months, it was 10 million. Less than a year later, 100 million. Today, we're closing in on 4 billion certificates issued and protect more than 320 million domains. including, I might add, NSA.gov and the White House. The web is encrypted by default. Peter's vision has come to pass, and I can't imagine a more fitting living monument to our friend. Sometimes people accomplish great things because they started out thinking naively that they were going to be easy, but Peter wasn't naive. He had the rare audacity to start things knowing for certain that they'd be very, very hard. Thank you, Peter. The internet is a better place for us all, thanks to you.
In his novel, Cat's Cradle, Kurt Vonnegut invented a word, karas. It was meant to describe teams of people that do God's will without discovering what they are doing. He wrote, if you find your life tangled up with somebody else's life for no very logical reason, that person may be a member of your karas. Peter was in my karas. For more than a decade, he and I found ourselves walking alongside an intellectual path that led from privacy to artificial intelligence. We were very different people. He was an Australian computer scientist and lawyer who biked everywhere, wore colorful socks, and lived in a house that he called the spaceship. I am a math major turned journalist who wears non-colorful clothing and lives with my husband and kids in a townhouse that in no way resembles a spaceship. I live in New York, and I didn't get the opportunity to spend as much time with Peter day to day as many of you did, but he was both an inspiration and a true friend in a world where both are rare. And more than anything, for me, Peter was a teacher. The first time I met Peter, I asked him a stupid question that he could easily have not bothered to indulge with an answer. It was January 2010, and we were at the Federal Trade Commission Roundtable on Privacy being held on UC Berkeley campus. I was a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, and I had just gotten the idea that I wanted to investigate the emerging market for personal data. But I didn't know that much about the technical aspects of online tracking. Peter had just been on a panel where he discussed super cookies, and I thought that sounded very intriguing. So I went up to him and asked him more about it. That morning, actually, he had just released Panopticlick, an awesome tool to let users see exactly how they were being tracked by a technique unknown to me at the time called browser fingerprinting. He could easily have just referred me to his tool, to the white paper that accompanied it, or even just to the remarks that he had just made that I should have taken better notes on. But he patiently walked me through all the details of super cookies in a way that somehow didn't make me feel ignorant. And soon I had many more questions for Peter, and he always had time to be patient and give me helpful answers. And unlike most experts that I talked to, he wasn't fussed about getting credit. He didn't demand to be quoted or named. He just wanted impact. He wanted the work to matter. And soon I found myself brainstorming with him about things that needed to be done in the world. And I began to share his view that building tools was a great way to educate the public about technology issues. Inspired by him, I started building browser extensions and other tools to accompany my investigations. At one point, Peter and I even worked together to produce a rating of secure messaging apps, a rare collaboration between an advocacy organization, EFF, and a journalistic organization, ProPublica, that I had to work very hard to convince my bosses to approve. When I founded a new nonprofit newsroom, The Markup, I called him up and got advice from him about how he built Privacy Badger, because we were building a privacy inspection tool called Blacklight that used many of the lessons from Privacy Badger. But his teaching went deeper than just our work collaborations. When he visited New York, he would come over and teach my kids. When my daughter was 8, he taught her how to hack into our poorly encrypted home Wi-Fi network, thus totally embarrassing me into upgrading my security and sparking her interest in cybersecurity, which eventually led her to start her own secure password business. Later, when my son was the same age, Peter patiently sat with him and taught him how to encrypt and decrypt ciphers, spurring a frenzy of cipher writing in our home. Peter also encouraged my children in rebellion, I guess is the best word for it. So during this time, my kids both had this experience that in their elementary school classroom, their teachers had this brilliant idea that they would give every single kid the same password. So my daughter logged into one of her classmates' accounts and sent an email denouncing the shared password experiment. Years later, my son actually logged into several other kids' accounts and posted on their pages, "Ha ha, I know your password." Both times I got calls from the teacher, but when Peter was over for dinner, he applauded them. He told them they were ready for the bug bounty business. They loved hearing that validation from another adult because I think until that time, they thought their mom was possibly a little bit loony. So Peter also taught me by example. His commitment to living an intentional life, living in community, riding his bike, donating his income to charity, inspired me to think harder about choices I was making. He was incredibly optimistic and full of joy. While we were both concerned about the problems that technology had wrought, the surveillance, the inequities, the abuse of AI, he was always looking for a solution and for a better way. He never stopped building towards a better world. I can think of no better legacy. I'm honored to have had the opportunity to learn and be inspired by him and to have him in my karas. And looking around this room, I realized just how many of us were in his karas. And I suggest we amend Vonnegut's definition from doing God's will to doing Peter's will.
All right, let's see if I can also advance the slides. Yes. I met Peter thanks to our mutual friend, Toby. So at the Future Humanity Institute, we like thinking big and long term. But then this Australian extra guy shows up and suddenly the office got a little bit bigger. The thoughts a little bit larger, and we got way more excited. So over the years, Peter tended to drop into Oxford, and we got interesting conversations going. And then, of course, occasionally I came over to San Francisco, and Peter introduced me to San Francisco in a way which I would never, ever have experienced otherwise. So I used to sleep on the couch in the spaceship. And when Peter was showing me around in the Mission District, was showing me interesting places, interesting objects, interesting environments, interesting subcultures. I remember when we were walking to a conference about something, and I joked, you know, everybody here in this town. And Peter kind of laughed at it, and then immediately met somebody that he wanted to present to me. And the next block over, there was another person he met that we needed to have a brief chat, and now we're getting rather late, so we better try to hide ourselves to run to the conference. Peter really opened my mind to many different things, including aesthetic things. I never believed I would ever try ecstatic dance, but thanks to Peter, I did it. But I also have been working with Peter on the academic side, trying to write papers about things that are relevant to our research at the Future Humanity Institute. And that can, of course, be very dry, except that Peter's vast interest, Peter's expansive ideas actually moves us forward in interesting directions. So, yeah. So I had some years earlier, when before I met Peter, done a workshop together with Nick Bostrom about whole brain emulation. What are the technical requirements to scan a brain and run it in a computer? We were thinking about the implication of that technology and how that might impact the world. I later wrote an academic paper about the philosophical and scientific and technological issues of feasibility. And then later, since I'm in philosophy, a paper about the ethics. Peter asked me, what about the risks? What about the security? So sitting in the window at the spaceship, looking out across the mission district, we started coming up with ways this amazing potential technology could be really bad. And then trying to figure out ways around that badness. What could go wrong and what can we do to prevent it? So in that particular paper, I think the most meatiest section is about computer security and this hypothetical future technology. Because if your brain is in the cloud better be secure. You don't want your mind pirated. You don't want the server farm where you exist to be hacked and you're being replaced by a copy of somebody else. So we ended up writing a little paper about that. We also came up with various nefarious ideas about neural malware and all sorts of other interesting things that we need to solve before brain emulation would actually be a good idea to try to do. He also worked with us and many others in the existential risk and AI safety world to think about malicious uses of AI. So some years before this, we had started down the road of thinking about in what way could artificial intelligence go badly off the rails. But there is an obvious other way things can go wrong with AI, and that is, of course, if malicious people use it in the wrong way or in the wrong context. And he helped writing this very useful report analyzing it. And here he used his knowledge as a security researcher, as somebody who's thinking good about adversarial situations, to come up with ways where technologies could go really badly wrong, and then showing where we might want to put in our efforts. Yep. Another interesting thing is, of course, could that ethical system that you want to have in the AI go wrong? And this particular paper, which is fairly dry, and it starts out with a fairly technical issue in population ethics. There exists an impossibility theorem, basically showing that if you accept 5 relatively obvious axioms for how things could be better or worse for a population, you have to accept 1 out of 5 horrible conclusions. So you might need to drop some common sense assumptions, and this is very problematic. Or at least it's problematic if you're a philosopher. Most people will yawn at this. Most people will not find that particularly issue problematic. Yes, of course, the sadistic conclusion sounds really bad, but isn't that just a job for philosophers? But if we start thinking about machines implementing behaviors like ethical thinking, even if they're not ethical themselves, they just need to make decisions, we might still want to program them to do the best thing. And this impossibility theorem actually shows that we are going to end up in trouble if you try to follow that. And Peter did a marvelous job of just showing that adding uncertainty doesn't exactly resolve the thing, but it does make it much less dangerous. If you make machines that actually are not certain about what they should do, but actually do recognize that some of these axioms might or might not be true, and you need to be acting more carefully in a probabilistic way that actually machines could actually do, then you get around some of these risks. So this is an area where uncertainty is useful. It's actually a way of softening the impact of many things. So we, of course, quite often want to come up with something truly new. And Peter's approach to this is very much take totally different domains and link them together and see what emerges. And quite often that vast range of interdisciplinary thinking leads to fantastic new ideas. Of course, sometimes it also leads to interesting rabbit holes that never go anywhere. So I vividly remember when I showed a mathematical database showing different theorems in mathematics and what axioms were built on. And we got the idea that maybe you could make a gigantic poster showing all of mathematics, or at least a sizable chunk of mathematics. So you could see what important theorems were based on, all the links back to the fundamental axioms. So we were very excited about this. We had some limited amount of time because I was leaving on a flight that afternoon. So he was at the hairdresser while I was kind of trying to program. And it might have distracted the hairdresser a bit because his hair got actually colored purple. And it turned out that we couldn't actually run the full graph because it was too large for the memory of a computer. So this project is still unfinished. We still need to make that gigantic poster showing the full map of mathematics. But of course, many of the ideas went even further than that. So one other idea that came up was and this was probably, it started, I think, on the floor of my flat in Stockholm during some New Year's Eve celebration, where Peter started talking about Pokemon minds. Got to collect all the experiences. You could imagine a mind that wants to experience the happiest possible state over and over again. But many of us would say, maybe you want to all the best experiences, or maybe even all the experiences. So we started thinking about different models of mind. And that led us to Aaron Sloman's classic paper about the space of possible minds, which by now is fairly old. And we realized nobody has actually tried to map the space of possible minds. So we have this unfinished project. Many of Peter's and my project are unfortunately unfinished because of the sheer breadth of ideas showing up while working on the project. In this case, we started looking at possible dimensions of a space of minds, trying to find ways of mapping it, trying to find ways of testing whether our ideas about possible minds were covering it well enough. It turns out that it's hard to figure out whether you have found all the dimensions of minds, but we did find many really weird kinds of minds that seems entirely possible. And that's, of course, also rather relevant if you try to design minds or mind-like things like artificial intelligence. Can you design so you end up in a safe corner or a corner that doesn't have a morally problematic aspect? Can we even say something about these minds? But of course, sometimes you can go much further than just exploring the space of possible minds. Some years ago, when I came into the office, there is this fundamental law of reality that when you talk about advanced technology, your slides will not update as you want. But in this case, I came into the office and on the whiteboard, I found a bet between Peter and Toby. The bet was basically that by the time we encounter the first independent evolved alien civilization, our level of technology has kind of stagnated. We're not making any meaningful technological advances. And the winner gets a solar system of the loser's choosing. Now, this is a long bet. It's going to probably take a long while before we meet any of the aliens. But the deep question here is a fascinating one. Is technology by its nature unbounded? In some boring sense, of course, we can always add extra fins to our spacecraft and paint them in an infinite number of patterns, but that's not really different kinds of spacecraft. Could there be that there is a finite, if large, set of things that technology can achieve? Or is it that actually, as Peter believed, this is totally open-ended? The combinatorial explosion of what you can combine and create is endless. So that was exciting, and we started discussing maybe one could make a paper out of this. And then we realized that maybe there is another bet. What about the limits of empirical science? Maybe it is that eventually we are going to have run all the experiments that are meaningful to run, and the rest is just collecting different kinds of beetles on alien planets or running mathematical simulations. Empirical science would end. Or maybe the universe is infinitely deep. There is always something to empirically discover or experiment on. At this point, Peter said, ever vested, we need a third bet. Why? Well, because there should be 3 bets to make it really elegant. And we realized that there is also another issue, and that is ethics. Is ethics unbounded? Is it that maybe we'll never agree on it and always discover new possibilities and new theories? Or is it that eventually we're going to figure out either the one true ethics, or maybe that there are 17 independent ethical systems and maybe there's no easy way to choose between them, but they are the only self-consistent positions? So we started thinking about this and starting to try to find people to take the different bets against each other. And of course, also trying to qualify these bets, trying to figure out how do you resolve them? When do you resolve them? What do you need to do? And again, we have a half-finished paper about this. It might remain half-finished for a long time. I'm hoping we get a chance to finish it and figure out on which side of these three big bets Peter was on, because he was always thinking bigger than one would have expected. I've learned so much from Peter, and I really wish we could all go far into the future and see what we can find about the bounds of our imagination. And then we'll find that Peter is already there thinking about how we can make it even prettier and even more impressive.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Adler, and I'm here to tell you about Peter's time at the Partnership on AI, where I was chief of staff and fortunate to be a close friend and collaborator of Peter's. I want to leave you with a few messages about Peter. First, Peter was a connector. He brought disparate groups together. He saw different ideas and how they could come together into one cogent whole. Second, that Peter used his voice to lift up others, especially those who are being unjustly treated in the world. And more than anything, Peter cared so much, and we are worse off for his absence today. Today, I'm mainly going to tell one story, but I'll start with some history before that. For those who aren't familiar, PAI is a membership-based nonprofit. It works to figure out standards and norms for how governments, companies should and shouldn't use AI technology. It was founded by some of the largest technology companies in the world, but has a very diverse membership base. We had the remarkable luck to hire Peter as our first director of research. He was roughly the 5th employee at PAI. Let me provide a quick timeline. Peter joined PAI full-time in October 2018, and he was our director of research until the beginning of 2020. Most of today's talk is going to focus right on when Peter joined PAI. But one thing that many people know is that while still at EFF, Peter was very involved in PAI. He actually co-chaired one of our first working groups. And this is a screenshot application to chair the group that I was able to turn up with thanks to our colleague, Claire Leibowitz. One thing I want to highlight, Peter was so modest in the way that he described himself. He wrote he had work collaborating with, and in some cases convening coalitions. This is an extremely funny way to describe being one of the leading voices of SOPA and PIPA, which blacked out the web and is one of the most successful protests of the digital era. Peter also saw where the field was going. Here he writes about military AI and the intersection with corporate tech. This was written 4 or 5 months before Google's military Project Maven became public and drew employee outrage. So with that, let's jump back to Peter's start at PAI. And I want to help ground this by reminding you what was going on in the world of AI in 2018. It's been a while. For one, large language models were in their infancy. BERT GPT-1 had just come out, if that helps to ground things for you. AI was really coming into the public consciousness. You had Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking in the news, warning of dangerous far futures of AI. But also, AI was already having real dangerous impacts on people's lives. And I want to credit Julia, who spoke earlier and is on the byline of this work. In particular, California had just passed a bill that would mandate these AI risk assessments across the state. And so this is where I want to pick up the story, talking about how Peter willed PAI's first substantive action into existence. Before I go on, we want to caveat, of course, none of this is a single person's accomplishment. For one, we had more than 100 delegates across the partnership work on this, as well as other colleagues like Alice Shang, who joined in March 2019, and Rachel Din, who joined around the same time as Peter. But with that, let me tell you about Peter's first day of work in October 2018. We met at an espresso bar in Soma, very Peter, and Peter had just come from a meeting with the ACLU of Northern California. He's telling me all about this piece of legislation that we absolutely have to get involved with. The short version is California was getting rid of money bail, and it was mandating algorithmic risk assessment tools in its place. Peter had grave concerns about the money bail industry, but would the AI replacement, which would keep people locked up on the basis of an algorithm, be any better? Peter felt we had a responsibility to make this as good as it could be for the tens of thousands of people affected in jail each night. And so I asked him, what would the plan be? And Peter said, well, there's a comment period to the state. We could probably help them. If they're going to do this, we need to help them figure out what issues to solve. And I said, great, when would we need to do that by? And Peter said, well, the deadline is in December. So let me back up to remind you of the timeline here. As much as I admire PAI, we were not the most productive organization in the early days. We were slow to staff up. We were being careful with what our first chosen work was. And so needless to say, this 2-month deadline to get a controversial stance together on a really fraught topic was unprecedented, to say the least, but Peter came in swinging big. And so we set out to form a stance, the first one ever for the Partnership on AI. In particular, we planned a session for our annual conference. And just to underline it, look how many people are in this photo. There are more than 100 organizations, more than 100 unique points of view who all feel really strongly about this issue. We had to get to consensus. We realized that partners mainly broke into 2 camps. There was one group firmly opposed and others who are open in principle but having some concerns. How could we get to consensus? Peter was the secret weapon. He was willing to put in so much legwork, whether it was one-on-ones, bringing together partners who vehemently disagreed with one another. Peter was the ultimate chameleon. He could assuage executives. He could talk in the details of the code with the hackers. He could empathize with the people who were being unjustly impacted. And he brought this work to a place it couldn't have been otherwise. Together with co-authors, Peter helped forge 2 big insights. One crux of this work, when you think of AI in the criminal justice system, what are you comparing it to? Are you comparing it to the status quo? To other criminal justice reforms? Are you thinking of the Platonic ideals of justice? Second, the bill was just poorly designed. And this was one of Peter's pet causes. I hesitate to call it a favorite cause because he was so upset about this. But here is the text from this bill. And as you'll note, it talks about what these risk assessment tools are meant to assess in people. And it conflates between failure to appear in court and committing another crime. Needless to say, those are extremely different, and he was right to be concerned. And this is just one example insight that Peter was able to help the community to converge on. In total, there were 10 distinct recommendations. I've created a bit.ly link to the report. It's really worth a read. In my view, this is still one of the clearest technical explainers that I've seen in the field of AI for policy and stakeholder audiences. And so that's bit.ly/PAI-report. So what ended up happening? Well, we hit our deadline. We got materials in front of the California Judicial Council. They were abridged ones. The full report came later with thanks to Alice and Rachel as well, but they were deep and substantive. Interestingly, SB 10 ended up getting repealed, funded by the bail bond industry. The California referendum process is complicated. I don't want to wade too deeply into this. Ultimately, Peter felt conflicted about this repeal. He described his position on Facebook as a regretful yes to keep the bill, seeing more promise to fix the AI tools than to fix the bail bond industry. The bigger impact is the audience that this work got us with the tool makers. And you can see the scope of one such tool on this map, including a tiny, tiny dot for San Francisco. And so I ask you to think of the millions who would be impacted if we can make these tools more just for the world, as Peter wished. Now, it's hard to attribute specific changes. These are often private companies, non-transparent tools. But I want to highlight how this tied into Peter's theory of change. Power and politics are real. Sometimes people aren't acting in good faith, but sometimes there are good misguided people out there, especially on these difficult technological topics. And we have to give them information to help them make better decisions. One thing I love about this slide, if you look in the bottom right, Peter says epistemic confidence, 70%, question mark. Peter was always trying to be calibrated. I want to give one concluding thought on this story. There's a really, really excellent talk that Peter gives on this work. I can't do it justice. You should really check it out. It's bit.ly/PDE-video. And there's a really striking moment at the beginning of this presentation. Peter begins by asking some calibration questions, as you might. How many of you work on ML? How many work on criminal justice? Then an audience member suggests, how about if anyone has been in the criminal justice system? And Peter asks a question. A few folks raise their hands. And Peter nods with understanding. There's no judgment. There's no salacious details to it. There's a recognition by Peter that for most people in the room, they haven't been in or around the system. And that's a remarkable privilege, especially for folks sometimes developing the tech that makes the problems worse. And so it's incumbent on us to be doing our part in trying to make the world more just, one bill at a time. The criminal justice work is really just one story. Peter seeded so much of PAI's work, including great work that continued on after he'd left the organization. As our colleague Katya Klinova put it, it was so invigorating to learn from and be encouraged by a truly Renaissance mind. He had such incredible energy that he shared so generously with us. And that is so important when you're trying to do something wickedly hard. So coming back to my main messages, Peter was the essential glue that kept our membership together in the early days. He had such a keen eye for the issues that mattered. He was so far ahead of the curve. And I'm so sad that he's not here to do this anymore, but so honored to get to share more of his story with you. Thank you.
Lots of ways to harm myself on the way here. All right, everyone, I'm gonna take a deep breath here. Okay. Hi, I'm Brittany Gallagher, and I co-founded the AI Objectives Institute with Peter. Peter was a guest on my radio show for many, many years, and we talked about so many of the things that you just heard. But in the last few years, we really started to focus on artificial intelligence. And every time we talked, we talked about so many different things, but every time we came back to this same thing, that there's this giant machinery of markets that we're all operating inside of, sometimes for good, but a lot of times for bad. And you can think of it as clicks over mental health or profit over employee welfare or the environment. And we kept thinking, what's going to happen when artificial intelligence is thrown into this machine? But there's been a lot of breakthroughs in AI also. And can we take the things that we've learned from artificial intelligence and maybe help make that machine better? And this framing for us was beautiful. And we kept thinking about this and thinking to ourselves, no one is talking about this in this way. And every time we talked, we came up with hundreds of ideas, how we could do so many different things. And we just thought, we've got to do something. We've got to start an organization that's going to do this. But it was really important to us to start an org that wasn't just AI safety people. To be fair, it's a lot of AI safety people, but to include economists, social scientists, journalists, because this technology is going to affect all of us. And so in September 2022, we founded the AI Objectives Institute. We got some money to start thinking about things and to do two things, to try to tell this story, but also, as you've heard, Peter was kind of a good engineer. So to build stuff. And so we spent about a year working towards that. And then over the summer of 2022, I was pregnant and Peter got sick. And while we were working together, he would tell me about these offers he got from insert big tech company here. And I'm like, Peter, you could go do the easy thing. Like, this is hard. What we're doing is hard. Like, you could go do it. And he's like, I can't, because I can't do this there. And that really stuck with me. And I kept thinking to myself, like, right, we can't do this anywhere else. Peter needs to be here. We need to do this. And then September came. And so I'm now 7 months pregnant and becoming less and less useful by the day. And Peter is in the hospital, but the two of us are going forward and we're together talking, and, he just really wanted to work on this. And I'm like, Peter, take a break, dude. You're in the hospital. Like, relax, like, chill, watch some TV. And he's just like, no, Brittany, like, this is what I need to do. This is my life's mission. And of course, as we're having this conversation, I have no idea that in 2 days he's going to be gone. And when he died, he was very explicit in what he wanted. And he wanted our organization to continue to thrive and to flourish. And I was the only one on the payroll, kind of by myself, but not really by myself, because so many people showed up to help carry this org to where we are today. And Peter, I'm sure many of you know, had a lot of plans, and we heard some of them worked, some of them didn't. But he had a plan for us. And it was to, yes, tell this story and to, yes, build things, but he didn't leave me completely by myself. Before Peter died, we both realized, like, we've got health stuff going on. We need some help. And we both narrowed in on the same person, Dayer Turan. And Dayer joined us and was in many of our working group sessions. And he comes from the place of the intersection, really, of technology and governance, and something that we talked a lot about. And we both just thought Dayer could really help bring this org forward. So what I have for you now is some audio of Peter trying very, well, maybe it's soft pitching Dayer on taking this over, but I'll play that for you now. Ooh, maybe. Nope, I keep.
Don't have the
I changed
energy levels that I'm used to having, and that I think you need to make a project succeed. And so I've been trying to digest, like, what does that mean for me? And for AI Objectives Institute, like, we want this thing to flourish. It's really important. No one else is doing it. Like, we need to get this story heard, these projects, at least some of them done. But I don't know that I can do that and fundraise and do those things well. One option in response to this would be to go and try and find like a less ambitious IC job somewhere that leans on my strong, like, knowledge and skills and is easy. Right. But that would be, in some sense, like, really declaring defeat. So a way to do this would be to stay at AOI, but have someone else who is the, like, energetic leader of the project, at least for the next while. So I found myself wondering, like, if there were a world where Dayer would want to do that, I could be way more effective, like, being an intellectual at the moment than being the person who's responsible for making a new organization fly. And so that's where I'm at the moment. And it's been a particularly hard week. So my thinking is probably, like, more in this direction than baseline, but I don't know. I don't expect you to have an answer to that question necessarily, but it was something I've been wanting to say to you for a while.
Well, I never got to give him an answer, so I'm here to tell you all, I said yes. So here's a letter to Peter. Peter, what an incredible gift and a wild ride you have given to me. I'm glad you called me before you took on the sabbatical. I'm really grateful that I committed to do this, to lead this org, not from a place of grief or a fear of loss, but it really made sense for me to work on this with you. Like as Jan said, you know, you're like really like Gandalf. You could pull off any magic feat, but had like very little organizational skill at the same time. So it made sense. Like this is the next thing I'd want to do. This is what's needed for the world to flourish. We need to make AI not just who we are, but what we aspire to be as humanity, so that it can lift us in that direction. And Peter, I love how I'm getting to know you still through everyone that's shown up. Within the first week, I received 89 emails from people I didn't know asking, hey, how can I help? And everyone I asked for support really showed up. So the decentralized Peter is still really active and definitely still runs on lunch meetings over dumplings. So Peter, I want to tell you what we've been up to over here. We now have 9 new people on our core team. You wanted us to not just imagine, but build the world that we want to live in, and we're building it faster than ever now. So we have 3 main research avenues, looking at civilization at every scale. We are first on an individual level on extended cognition. What systems and tools can enable and protect health, autonomy, and coherence for individuals? Then on a collective level on scalable cooperation. What systems can enable groups of individuals to pursue common goals and a common understanding so that they can co-create mutual betterment? And finally, on a civilizational level, on systemic alignment, what systems ensure large-scale decision-making with humans, AI, and institutions all together so that they are aligned with true human objectives? We're not just doing academic research on theory and policy, we're actually building prototypes and tools for the world to use. And we built Talk to the City. Peter, maybe you remember, and I was cynical about partnerships, and you said, let's just build it. Everyone's going to use it. So I said, okay, let's do that. So Talk to the City is a platform. It's a digital town hall that can help communities make collective policy decisions at scale and in real time. From just 50 people to 5 million people, how can we gather everyone to see and understand diverse perspectives that exist in society? Every distinct viewpoint will be represented by a different large language model that you can talk to and interact with. So these models can help individuals refine their understanding of nuances of the discussion points that they might not have noticed before. Furthermore, these AI systems can talk to each other as well. And through that, we will be able to elicit a stronger collective understanding and policy information. These systems will enable us to iterate faster compared to month-long quantitative surveys. And all of this should be available for citizens, for journalists, researchers, policymakers on any issue. And guess what? Yeah, we started that and folks are asking us, how can we use it? We've got active interest from folks at BlackRock City. We've got, which you would have loved, and we've got active interest from folks at the UN. So what else? We're working on with psychologists and cognitive scientists on a set of tools that we call extended cognition. These can help an individual refine and ground their perspective while we are being continuously bombarded with material that can be coercive or misleading or triggering addictive dopamine loops or illicit anger. A lot of this content has a hidden agenda, and sometimes it's as simple as, keep you glued to the screen so that you can see more ads. Some of this content is real, more and more of this content will be fake. So what are we building? We're building foundation tools that can evaluate and flag content that you receive with warnings to help you navigate the world. We will be building browser plugins, search tools with all of our collaborators, and open the tools to be used by all other tech builders as well, so that this is open source wealth for the world. All the way from major AGI labs to media companies, everyone has been asking, what are these qualitative evaluation tools so that we can see the content we're engaging is healthy or not? On another avenue, on an individual level, we're building tools that can help individuals flourish better by helping them refine their own thoughts, goals, and find blind spots. So we're building AI systems that can mirror these patterns back for better introspection. This is the level of human alignment we're interested in. You may want to share your past journals or even further personal data so that you can build an effective mirror. And yes, it's true. The most prominent applications, the most interesting ones of AI will also be the scariest. And as Anders said, you don't want your mind to be pirated. So this requires a level of privacy and personalization and data ownership that is just not readily out there right now. So this is the level of ambition we're going forward with. These need to be built soon. And again, not for the machines to make more money with more ads and clicks, but for humans to flourish so that others can also build on the same stack of AI and privacy backbone. Peter, you know how you'd say, let's record this conversation. We will come up with so many ideas so we can go through it. I think we are doing a lot of these ideas now. We have 5 more projects and we're looking at transparency, at law. I'd love to tell you all about them, but we don't have enough time now. So what else? We published our white paper also. That took a while. After 46 reviewers, 300 comments, and 21 deleted pages, where we will publish these as blog posts after, the white paper is out. It really takes a village. It took a village for it. And since then, I get about 10 people reach out every week saying, hey, how can I help? How can we work together on this? We have more than 80 collaborators and volunteers now. And you know what's the best part, Peter? You haven't even met some of these people. These people are here because they believe in the mission. So don't worry, we got you. I wish you were here to see it all. You'd be really thrilled to see it got to this point. And we have so much more to do. We're thrilled to do it. Everyone is cheering for us, that I see for sure. So everyone knows this work needs to be done. And now we're doing it. So we won't leave your work unfinished. One more thing on our 6-month check-in, Peter. You took optimism not just as a belief, but as a strategy at its core. And we talked a lot about alignment for systems and AI. I must say, I really found my alignment through you. I found my purpose from how you've shown up in life, staying relentlessly focused on the change that you see that needs to be made, what matters the most, making that change through building that change, and showing up with just sheer love and joy for everyone to come along on the path with you. And I never knew one could have this much energy and joy while doing their work. I understood it for the first time. I think I understand you a little better as I'm wearing your shoes literally these days. Thank you, Peter. I'm so grateful for the compass you've given, not just to me, but to all of us at AOI. And we're so excited to share it with the rest of the world. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nicole. I'm Peter's sister. I'm not on the speaking list today. You can think of me as a sort of conversational garnish for this evening. So, look, I had a different relationship to Peter, obviously, to most of the people who've spoken tonight. As a sister, my relationship to Peter's work was mostly one of a spectator, an occasional compulsory user tester. So right from his very first text-based adventure, 1985, circa, coded on an MC10, which is a little computer you plug into a TV, and his first community venture, the Q Junior Computer Club, membership 5. And thanks to our engineer, Father Greg, who's here today, up the front. Only 5,000-kilometer commute. We grew up in a household that was crammed with technology of all the most exciting kind. And we grew up in a house where activist spirit was an assumed thing. And that philosophical argument was as essential an item at the breakfast table as fresh bread and good coffee. And what Seth was saying about growth curves, Peter really took those family values and growth curves. So watching Peter, professionally speaking, on all his projects was a little bit like watching Wile E. Coyote from Roadrunner, except that as he shot off the cliff into the open air, he would somehow make it all the way across the canyon before gravity worked out what he was up to. And there was a particular look that he'd get in his eye, get this kind of focused look. He'd get his laptop, he'd typing away at his laptop, or he'd look up and to the left and say, wow, wow. And like he said to DR, he'd say, well, I think we can pull it off. And once he got in that state, and I'm sure so many of you here know this, it was impossible to say no to Peter. You could not. It was what he wanted, he would wheedle out of you. He would start calling meetings. He would derail plans. He'd derail his plans. He'd derail your plans. He'd derail anyone's plans to get his mission started. And there was no obstacle that couldn't be overcome with enough logic or excitement or puppy dog eyes, or when all else failed, the irrefutable pleas about the importance of saving the world. Peter and I chatted a lot about AOI while he was in Melbourne last year during lockdown. And it turned out that the exciting new venture that he was working on was actually his last great project. And even from his hospital bed, he was charging full speed ahead on AOI. And all of his last wishes and instructions, bar a couple, about the survival of this incredibly important project. And I think we all know that Peter's death really could have plunged AOI into the proverbial canyon. But thanks so much to all of you who donated through the GoFundMe that we ran last year, and also who donated your time and your expertise. We've managed to get this Peter plan over the canyon just for the time being. And I think that's a function of the things that we all want that Peter wanted. We want to see Peter's plans come to fruition. We want to keep engaging with his incredible community. We want to stop the robots from eating us and crapping out money. We really, really hope that you'll keep donating your time, your energy, your enthusiasm, your money, your networks, most importantly, your collection of gigantic brains, because there are so many incredible minds in this room. And as a sister, it's incredibly humbling for me to see this kind of community for my brother, to see the Q Junior Computer Club here in front of me today. A community of people who knew Peter, who collaborated with Peter, and also a community of people who will get to know Peter and who will get to collaborate with Peter in the future going forward. And I want to thank you all for being part of this. And I hope you all see this not just as a memorial, but as the start of an incredible living legacy. Thank you so much.
Hi again. We have one more piece of Peter audio that I wanted to share with you all. So.
Well, I probably can't tell you all of my secret plans, but one secret plan I'm working on is to give human beings a different story about capitalism, a different story about the giant machinery of markets that we live inside, and to have that story give us more power over the machine. Another secret plan I'm working on is to try to weave more durable forms of community in my life and in the lives of the people around me. I guess I have other secret plans, but they mostly involve patience. What about you?
As we close the formal part of this evening, let me quickly say a second round of thanks to the Internet Archive, to the volunteers and the organizers, and also to our speakers. Thank you. I can't resist pointing out, with my historian of ideas hat on, Seth had mentioned that if you, up until today, had Googled Peter Eckersley Internet Archive Memorial, you would have seen his talk at the Aaron Swartz Memorial. And one of my favorite moments in that talk and that event was the subconscious and later conscious inspiration for tonight. There was a moment in that talk where he's talking about what it's like to be an intellectual sparring partner with Aaron. And he uses, and as an example, this kooky idea that he's cooking up about paradoxes in formal population axiology, and how he's describing this to Aaron, and Aaron is not having it. Aaron just says, no, what you're thinking of doesn't work for these reasons, boom, boom, boom. And as they're talking, there's this glimmer in Peter, and he's like, okay, but what if we did it this way? And that turned out to be the key insight that cracked that paper that has since been published, just a couple years ago. And I think that is a beautiful example of just these connections between people, the way that these ideas emerge from the social dynamics of a community. Peter's absolute unwillingness to take no for an answer, or perhaps his uncanny ability to turn a direct challenge into a sort of invitation to a collaborative dance. And I think that's very, very beautiful and very Peter. And also his willingness to stick on a problem for the better part of a decade and to finally get it over the line. So for those who would like to stay, we will have a reception starting now. There are going to be food and drinks in 2 locations. Number 1 in the foyer where you entered, and number 2 in what is called the Sunday School room, which is a larger space downstairs from that. There's also a memorial and a shrine in the back, which I encourage you to have a look at. Food and drinks are not permitted in this room, but you are welcome to socialize here as well, as long as you leave your food and drinks at the door. One final thing. And as many people have articulated, I feel it was one of Peter's consummate gifts to bring other people together and to make connections among the many diverse and wonderful people that he knew. And I would like to invite you to take this opportunity to do the same. Of course, I encourage you to reconnect with old friends and colleagues, but if you feel up for it, say hi to someone that you don't already know, or make an introduction between 2 people who don't know each other but you think should meet. And maybe we can all become part of Peter's secret plans, and maybe we can share some of our own as well. Thank you so much.